The sound of rushing water was everywhere as the cold river rose after days of heavy rain. In the distance, a German shepherd struggled against the strong current, his thin body fighting to stay above water. Exhaustion showed in every movement as his head dipped in and out of the freezing water. People nearby stood frozen on the riverbank, unsure of how to help. Just when it seemed like there was no hope, two brave men jumped in to save the dog. What began as a desperate rescue turned into something surprising that no one expected. This is a story about courage, survival, and an incredible twist that will leave you amazed. The storm was over, but the mess was everywhere. The river that cut through the edges of Elmsford had turned into a raging torrent it's usually calm. The water had become very dangerous, so most people stayed inside to avoid the freezing cold and risky conditions. But for Jack and his brother Ethan, it was just another morning driving to work on the winding road next to the river. As Jack looked at the water, he initially thought he saw a log floating by. But as they got closer, he noticed it was moving and struggling. His heart sank. "Ethan, stop the car!" Jack yelled urgently. Ethan hit the brakes and the tires slid a bit on the wet road. "What is it?" he asked, looking where Jack was staring at the river. "It's a dog," Jack replied. Jack whispered, and they both jumped out of the car, running to the riverbank. It was a shocking sight. A German shepherd was in the strong currents of the water. The dog was struggling to stay above water, his thin body and soaked fur making it harder. He was getting weaker as the cold affected him more. "We need to help him," Jack said as he took off his jacket. "Are you crazy?" Ethan replied, looking scared. "The current could drown you." Jack paused for a moment, still watching the dog. "If we don't try, he will die." Before Ethan could say more, Jack moved forward. Jack climbed down the muddy bank and into the cold water, which took his breath away. He kept going, focusing on the dog. Ethan cursed quietly and followed, knowing he couldn't let his brother do this alone. The current was stronger than they expected, making each step a struggle as the freezing water pushed against them, trying to pull them under. Jack got to the dog first and hugged its shaking body. The dog made a quiet whimper but didn't try to pull away. It was too tired to fight back. Jack shouted, but his voice was barely heard over the loud river. Ethan reached them a moment later and helped settle Jack as they started their slow and difficult journey. As they walked back to shore, each step felt very long. But at last they made it to the riverbank and collapsed onto the wet grass. The dog lay weakly between them, but he was living. Ethan felt relief as he checked the dog's pulse. The dog's chest rose and fell softly, and its breathing was calm but light. Jack sat up, his hands shaking from the cold and excitement. "We need to warm him up now." Without saying anything more, they wrapped the dog in Jack's jacket and carried him to the car. The drive back to Ethan's house was tense, with the heater on high as the brothers tried to keep the dog from getting colder. "Do you think he'll make it?" Ethan asked while looking at the dog in the back seat. Jack's jaw clenched. "I don't know, but we'll do everything we can." The car raced down the icy road, the heater working hard to keep the cold air at bay. In the back seat, the German shepherd lay still, wrapped in Jack's jacket. His breathing was weak, each rise and fall a sign of how close he was to danger. Jack looked at him in the rearview mirror and tightened his grip on the steering wheel, urging himself to drive faster. Jack said, his voice tight, "I'm already pushing it." Ethan nervously looked at the slick road ahead. The icy rain had created patches of black ice, and they really didn't need any more problems. Still, he pressed down a little harder on the gas pedal, sensing his brother's haste. "Hang on, buddy," Jack mumbled quietly, unsure if he was talking to the dog or himself. Once they arrived at Ethan's house, the brothers got started right away. Jack carefully picked up the dog, feeling sad when he noticed how light it was. He could feel the dog's sharp ribs through his wet jacket. Jack had already chosen the name Max, so he didn't move much. Inside the house, Ethan picked up some towels and a space heater while Jack carefully placed Max on the living room floor, which felt warm right away. But Jack realized it wasn't enough. He knelt next to the dog, wrapped him in towels, and gently dried his tangled fur. The dog was very cold. Jack's voice trembled as he said he had never seen an animal so hurt and defenseless. Ethan turned on the space heater and pointed it at Max. "What else can we do?" he asked, worried. "First, we need to warm him up, then we'll call the vet," Jack answered. "But for now, we have to keep him alive for the next hour." The brothers worked hard to warm Max up. Jack rubbed his legs to help his blood flow, while Ethan gently gave him small sips of warm water. At first, Max didn't react, his eyes barely open, but eventually he started to weakly lick the water. "That's it, buddy," Jack encouraged. Jack said gently, his voice encouraging, "You're a fighter," as he noticed Max's body starting to shake a bit, which meant his temperature was going up. Jack sighed with relief. It wasn't a lot, but it was a step forward. He leaned back on the couch feeling tired, but he couldn't stop looking at the dog. "Do you think he was left behind?" Ethan broke the long silence and asked a question. Jack nodded sadly and said there were no tags or information. His tone became serious when he added that someone had given up on the animal. Ethan looked at Jack, knowing he was determined. Jack had always cared for animals and had saved them before, but this felt different. He felt an immediate bond with Max. By the time the vet, a local doctor who agreed to come to their house, arrived, the worst part of the emergency seemed to be over. Max's breathing had calmed, and although he was still weak, he was now awake and listening to the voices around him. The vet, a kind woman in her middle years, knelt beside Max to examine him. "He's malnourished, dehydrated, and very tired," she said after a few minutes, "but the fact that he's still alive after everything he's been through shows his strength." Jack felt a sense of relief, even though he knew Max still needed care. "What can we do to help him?" he asked. The vet smiled reassuringly. "You're already helping him. Keep him warm, feed him small meals often, and give him time to rest. He needs to heal both his body and his feelings." As the vet gathered her things, she told Jack, "You saved his life tonight. Most dogs like him wouldn't have survived." Jack felt a tightness in his throat as he looked down at Max, who was resting with his head on a towel, his eyes half closed but no longer scared. "I didn't save him," Jack said softly. "He saved himself. I just gave him a chance." While sitting in the living room, watching over Max, a strong sense of determination grew between the brothers. They had brought him back from death, but they knew there was a long journey ahead. Jack was prepared to do whatever it took to support Max. The first night with him was both hopeful and anxious. Jack stayed awake on the couch, watching the German Shepherd lying by the fireplace. Max was wrapped in blankets, breathing slowly and calmly. Jack would occasionally check to see if his chest was still moving up and down. Ethan had gone to bed hours ago, though not without constantly telling Jack to get some sleep himself. But Jack couldn't. There was something about Max that kept him tethered to the dog's side, as if leaving him alone for even a moment might cause him to slip away around 3 a.m. Max stirred, Jack quickly sat up and noticed the dog lifting its head from the blanket. The dog's eyes were open and more aware, but still tired. It looked at Jack, who was unsure of what to do. "Hey, buddy," Jack said. Jack leaned forward slowly and whispered, "You're okay. You're safe." At first, Max stayed still, but when he heard Jack's words, his ears moved. After a moment, he laid his head back down on the blanket and relaxed a little. Jack sighed and relaxed against the couch. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The next morning, Ethan saw Jack in the same place he had left him, still watching over Max. With a small smile, he shook his head and went into the kitchen to make coffee. The smell of coffee filled the room, and shortly thereafter Jack was able to wake up and join his brother. "You're going to burn yourself out if you don't sleep," Ethan said, sliding a mug across the counter. "I'll sleep later," Jack replied, taking a drink. His voice was strained from the extended night, but his eyes were alight with determination. "I simply wish to confirm that he is in good health." Ethan glanced toward the living room, where Max lay motionless. Heck, a hardy dog declared that if he had survived that river, he could survive anything. Jack nodded, but his apprehension persisted. He was aware that Max's physical recovery would require time, but his primary concern was the emotional scars. The hollow look in Max's eyes and his flinching at sudden movements all suggested a past rife with neglect and pain. Throughout the day, Jack made an effort to ensure that Max felt at ease. He brought him small portions of food and sat near him as Max tentatively sniffed the bowl. It took several attempts, but Max eventually began to eat, with his movements slow and deliberate. Jack could not help but smile as he observed the dog take his first genuine strides toward recovery. "A good child." Jack's voice was rich with encouragement as he murmured, "You will be fine." Later that afternoon, Ethan joined them in the living room, where he sat on the floor a few feet away from Max. He observed as Jack tenderly stroked the dog's head with his careful and deliberate touch. "You have always had a soft spot for strays." Ethan reminisced with a grin. "Remember the time you brought home a kitten you found in a dumpster?" Jack chuckled gently, his gaze remaining fixed on Max. "Yes, but this is different. He requires our assistance." In the following days, Max began to exhibit small signs of improvement, including an increase in appetite, a stabilization of his breathing, and an increased ability to move around the house. Despite his reluctance to approach Ethan and his apprehension of sudden noises, Max followed Jack everywhere, his trust in the man growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as Jack sat on the floor beside Max's makeshift bed, the dog did something that caught him completely off guard. Ethan's smile faded slightly as he nodded. Jack whispered, "You trust me, don't you?" before gingerly resting his hand on Max's head. The dog did not move, his eyes half closed as he relaxed against Jack's touch. Max shifted closer to Jack, his head resting against the man's leg. Although it was a simple gesture, it meant the world to Jack. Ethan entered the room and paused in the doorway upon observing the previous scenario. He expressed his amusement with a grin, stating, "It appears that you have a shadow." Jack's heart swelled with a combination of relief and pride as he smiled. Max still had a considerable distance to travel, but this moment was particularly tranquil. The act of trust was a sign that they were on the correct track. The morning sun broke through the thin layer of fog, casting a soft golden light across the yard. The warmth of spring was beginning to creep in, melting the last remnants of snow and replacing them with patches of damp grass for the first time since Jack and Ethan had rescued Max. Jack decided it was time to take Max outside. Max had been recovering well over the past week, with his ribs no longer as pronounced and the patches of fur that had fallen out beginning to grow back soft and fuzzy against his skin. Jack had been cautious about exerting too much pressure on Max too soon, but he could see that the dog was becoming restless and wanted to give him a taste. The first taste of freedom he may have experienced in a long time was while standing by the rear door. Jack retrieved a tether. "Do you believe Max is prepared for a breath of fresh air?" Max, who was still hesitant about new experiences, tilted his head at the sound of Jack's voice while reclining on his bed by the fire. There was a hint of inquisitiveness in his gaze. Jack knelt down and extended his hand, tenderly encouraging his friend. "Come on, buddy, you've got this." Jack clipped the leash onto Max's collar and opened the door, stepping outside into the fresh morning air. Max rose to his feet, his movements still stiff, his body still adjusting to the strength he was slowly regaining. Max hesitated at the threshold, his paws scarcely touching the cold wood of the porch. "It's all right," Jack said softly, gently tugging on the leash. "I am currently present, taking precautionary measures." Max followed Jack outside, where the cool air ruffled his patchy fur. He cautiously sniffed at the ground, his nose twitching as he explored the unfamiliar scents. Jack meticulously observed him, allowing him to proceed at his own tempo. Ethan emerged from the doorway, holding a mug of coffee. I must confess, I was surprised by his sudden departure from the house. He spoke while leaning against the frame. Jack shrugged, his gaze remaining fixed on Max. Despite his appearance, Max is more resilient than he appears. The yard was enclosed by a fence, providing a secure environment for him to explore without fear. At first, Max moved slowly, his slender legs trembling under his weight. With each step, Jack became more secure. He followed Max, holding the leash loosely and letting Max choose the direction. Max stopped by a patch of grass, sniffing the ground carefully. Jack smiled and crouched next to him as he watched the dog explore with interest. "You like it out here, don't you?" Jack said while he scratched Max behind the ears. The dog's tail wagged slightly and Jack smiled more. Soon, Max started to explore the yard. He moved carefully, keeping his head low and sniffing every corner. At one point he looked up at the sky, his ears twitching at the chirping of birds far away. For a moment, Jack could see a bit of the dog's personality. Max used to be a curious and happy dog, not one filled with fear and pain. But then, the moment was suddenly broken when a loud car drove by on the road behind the house. Max froze, his body stiff as his ears flattened against his head. Jack quickly knelt beside him, placing a hand on the dog's back. "It's okay," Jack said softly. His voice is cool and steady. "You're safe. Nothing will hurt you." Max was breathing lightly. His eyes moved toward the sound of the car, but after a moment, he looked back at Jack. The fear in his eyes started to fade, replaced by a look of trust. "That's my boy." Jack smiled and scratched under Max's chin, saying, "You're doing great." Ethan, looking from the doorway, shook his head in surprise. "Hune is a completely different dog," he said. "I don't know how you do it, Jack." Jack kept his hands on Max's back and said, "It's not me, it's him. He just needs someone to give him a chance." As the sun rose higher, Max started to relax. He sniffed the flowers by the fence and wagged his tail while exploring the yard. Jack felt proud with every little step Max took. This was the first time Max had truly felt free since Jack and Ethan rescued him from the icy river. It wasn't perfect. He still had memories of fear and doubt, but today was a big step toward a better future, and that meant a lot to Jack. Over the next few weeks, Max got stronger. He gained weight, and his fur, although still patchy in some spots, became soft and shiny. Jack spent all his time helping Max get better, from cooking healthy meals to keeping him company by the fire in the evenings. Their friendship grew stronger, and even Ethan, who usually kept to himself, admired Max's strength. However, things weren't always simple. Max was still afraid of loud noises and new experiences, a reminder of past traumas he faced before Jack and Ethan rescued him. Although he trusted Jack, there were times when memories of his past would overwhelm him with fear. One Thursday afternoon, Jack took Max for a longer walk to help him slowly get used to the world beyond their yard. They walked through a nearby wooded area that Jack loved, where the sounds of nature offered a calm escape. Max walked next to him with a loose leash, sniffing the ground. His steps were steady, his tail wagged a little, and for the first time, he looked almost carefree. Jack smiled, his heart bursting with pride as he watched Max take in the world around him. "You're doing so well." Buddy Jack spoke softly, saying, "You're getting stronger every day." They arrived at a clearing where the path led to a small, quiet park. In the distance, a couple of kids were playing with a soccer ball, and their laughter filled the air. Jack noticed Max's ears perk up at the sound, but this time, instead of retreating like he used to, Max tilted his head in curiosity. Jack knelt next to him, scratching behind his ears, and said there was nothing to be afraid of. Just then, a loud engine noise came from the nearby parking lot as a car backfired, breaking the quiet afternoon like a gunshot. Max froze in fear, his body becoming stiff. He tucked his tail between his legs and his breathing got quick and shallow. "It's okay, Max," Jack said quickly, rubbing the dog's back. "It's just a car." But Max didn't seem to listen. He tried to pull away, looking for a way to escape. Jack held the leash tightly and spoke in a cool voice, and steadfast. even as his heart ached for the dog's apparent anguish. "Hey, hey," Jack murmured, crouching down to Max's level. "I have you. You are safe. No one is going to harm you." Max's wide, panicked eyes met Jack's, and for a moment it appeared as though the dog was lost in the shadows of his past. However, Jack gradually observed a glimmer of recognition in Max's gaze, and the tension in his body eased slightly. He took a hesitant step toward Jack. "That's it," Jack said softly, his hand resting gently on Max's side. "You're okay, buddy. I'm right here." It took several minutes, but Max's breathing eventually slowed, and he lowered his head, leaning into Jack's touch. Jack exhaled, unaware that he had been holding the dog and wrapping his arms around him, keeping him close. "You are so courageous," Jack murmured. "I'm so proud of you." Ethan, who had come along for the walk and had been watching from a distance, approached cautiously. "Is he okay?" he asked, his voice low. Jack nodded, glancing up at his brother. "Yeah, he just needs time." They decided to head back home, cutting the walk short. Jack kept a steady hand on Max's leash, speaking to him. Softly the entire way. By the time they reached the house, Max was calm again. Though he stayed close to Jack's side, his trust in the man evident in every step that evening. As Max lay by the fire, Jack sat beside him, his hand resting on the dog's head. He thought about how far Max had come, how much progress they had made together. But he also knew that healing wasn't a straight line. There would be more moments like today, more reminders of the pain Max had endured, but Jack wasn't going anywhere. He had made a promise to Max the day he pulled him from the river, and he intended to keep it. Max wasn't just a dog, he was family, and family didn't give up on each other as Max drifted off to sleep. His body relaxed and his breathing steady. Jack smiled, acknowledging that the journey ahead might be lengthy. However, they would traverse it together, one stride at a time. The following morning, the sun rose over the small town, casting a gentle light through the trees. Jack awoke early to the aroma of freshly brewed coffee emanating from the kitchen. He peered over to Max, who was coiled up on his bed near the fireplace, his breathing slow and steady even in his slumber. Max's progress was apparent. Although his body remained slender, it appeared healthier, and the patches of fur that had begun to regrow now gave him a softer appearance. Jack smiled as he approached the kitchen where Ethan was seated with a scalding mug of coffee. "You are up early," Jack acknowledged, pouring himself a cup that he was unable to sleep much, and Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I have been reflecting on Max and the significant progress he has made. It appears that he is prepared for the next phase." Ethan's head inclined in curiosity as to what type of step I intended to take him on to the lake. Jack stated that he has not been in close proximity to water since we rescued him from the river. However, I believe it is time for him to confront his fear, and I am eager to be present to provide assistance. Ethan hesitated briefly. "Are you certain that is a sound idea? What if it proves to be too much for him?" Jack's expression softened as he glanced toward Max. He said, "I'll take it slow. If he's not ready, we'll stop. But I think he's stronger than we give him credit for." Later that afternoon, Jack and Ethan loaded Max into the truck and drove to the lake, a quiet spot on the outskirts of town where the water was calm and clear. The area was mostly empty, with only a few families picnicking in the distance. Jack parked the truck and climbed out, opening the back door for Max. "Come on, buddy," he said, holding out his hand. Max hesitated briefly before descending onto the plush grass. Jack could observe the tension in Max's body, but there was also curiosity, a positive sign. They walked slowly toward the lake's edge with the leash loose and in Jack's hand, and Max's steps were cautious. His ears trembled as he took in his surroundings, and his nose sniffed the air. His head was lowered as he sniffed the ground. When they reached the water's edge, he halted, his body stiffening slightly. "It's okay," Jack said gently, kneeling beside him. "It's safe. Nothing will harm you." Max gazed at Jack, his eyes searching for reassurance. Jack gently reached out and dipped his hand into the cool water, allowing it to drip from his fingers. He smiled and said, "It's not so bad." Max's ears flitted back and forth as he smelled at the water. He took a step closer, his paws brushing against the edge of the lake. Jack was prepared to retrace his steps if Max exhibited any indications of distress. However, he was taken aback when he lowered his head. Licked at the water, his movements were hesitant but composed. Ethan, who had been standing a few feet away, grinned. "Well, look at that. The brave guy is doing it." Jack quietly chuckled. "I informed you that he was more resilient than he appeared for the next hour." Jack permitted Max to investigate the vicinity at his leisure. The dog strolled along the shoreline, his nostrils perpetually perusing the air and the ground. At one juncture, he even entered the shallow water, his paws splashing gently as he experimented with the unfamiliar sensation. The sun began to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the lake, and Jack felt a surge of pride as he witnessed Max conquer one of his greatest fears. Jack sat on the grass with Max by his side. The dog's body was relaxed, and his eyes were bright and alert. Jack scratched behind his ears with a smile, saying gently, "You did amazing today. I'm so proud of you." Max leaned into Jack's embrace. In that instant, his tail was faintly wagging. Jack came to the realization that they had come a long way. The dog, who had previously been too timid to trust and too feeble to stand, was now regaining his physical and emotional strength. That evening, Max curled up by the fire in his home, his body elongating in a manner that demonstrated his newfound comfort. Jack sat in close proximity to him, observing him with a smile. Ethan entered the room and sat against the doorway, holding a flask of tea in his hand. He is accompanied by a distinct dog. Jack nodded his head, his gaze never departing from Max. He is not merely a distinct dog. He is demonstrating the importance of perseverance and the ability to never give up. Ethan smiled and sipped his tea. "You have accomplished something extraordinary," Jack replied. "Max did it. I simply provided him with the opportunity." The fire crackled gently. Jack experienced a profound sense of tranquility. Max's journey was not yet complete, but he had taken another stride toward a life of safety and love. Jack was certain that they would confront any obstacles that arose in the weeks that followed his trip to the lake. The once fragile German shepherd now walked with assurance, his steps steady and his head held high. His coat, despite still displaying a few scars from his past, was full and healthy, gleaming in the sunlight. Max was no longer merely surviving, he was thriving. For Jack, witnessing Max's transformation was a gift, as each small milestone served as a reminder of the distance they had traveled together, and each wag of Max's tail was evidence of the trust and love that had developed between them. However, Max had undergone a significant transformation. Jack had also imparted to Max the virtues of patience, compassion, and the ability to persevere. One afternoon, Jack resolved to return Max to the river, the same river where his journey had nearly come to an end. The decision was not a simple one. Jack was aware that it could evoke recollections for Max, but he also believed that it could serve as a moment of closure, allowing Max to finally leave the P behind. Ethan joined them, providing silent support as the three of them strolled along the riverbank. The air was crisp and the water was much calmer than it had been on the fateful day. Max trotted beside Jack, his leash loose in Jack's hand. He appeared at ease, his nose twitching as he absorbed the familiar sense of the area. When they reached the spot where Jack and Ethan had rescued him from the freezing water, Max's ears perked up, and for a brief moment he stood motionless, gazing at the gentle current. Jack kneeled beside him, resting a hand on his back. "This is the beginning," Jack said gently. "Do you recall?" Max turned his head, his deep brown eyes meeting Jack's. His gaze was devoid of fear and hesitation, only trust. Jack beamed, his heart swelling with pride. "You are not the same dog you were that day," he continued. "You are now stronger and braver, and I am so proud of you." Ethan chuckled from a few feet away, as if he knew that Jack had given Max a final scratch behind the ears for standing. Max let out a soft bark in response to Jack's words. "Come on, buddy, let's keep moving." They continued their walk along the river, with the sound of the water providing a peaceful backdrop as they made their way back to the truck. Jack could not help but contemplate the lessons that Max had imparted to him. He had embarked on this voyage with the intention of rescuing a dog, but the reality was that Max had also rescued him that evening as the sun set. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the soft hum of crickets as Jack and Max sat together on the veranda, gazing out at the horizon. Max was lying at Jack's feet, his head resting on his paws and his body completely at ease. Jack broke the silence, stating, "I don't know who abandoned you or why they gave up on you, but I'm glad they did, because it brought you to me." Max's tail waggled faintly and Jack smiled. "Your family is now with you, and no one will ever abandon you again, I assure you." As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Max let out a deep, contented exhale. Jack extended his hand to rest on his back, and the world felt perfect at that moment. Two souls who had rescued each other were bound by an unbreakable affection. Max's journey from the brink of death to a life of love and safety was not merely a tale of survival. It was also a tale of hope, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his dog. As they sat together, basking in the quiet light of the stars, it was evident that this was only the beginning of a beautiful new chapter for both of them. Max's story serves as a reminder of the unbreakable bond that is formed when love and compassion are freely given, and the power of second chances. His journey from the brink of death to a life filled with hope demonstrates that no life is too far gone to be saved. If this story resonates with you, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who believes in the power of resilience and love. Together, we can inspire more incredible stories like this one.